Warning: some viewers may find the following content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I've always loved Cartoon Network. When I was growing up, it was my favourite channel to watch. Even today, it has some good shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is cute and a mildly entertaining show. Not really my cup of tea. It's a little immature, but my little brother seems to love it a lot. One day I was watching Adult Swim when I realised it had been up so late that I hadn't even kept track of the time. It was already 4 AM. I don't recall ever watching as this late, so I stayed awake to see what would happen when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little bit confused about this, about an episode of a very popular show coming on this early, but I was bored and I decided I would watch it, thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my brother. Sort of, I know. The flashy and energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I recall. The music was slightly different, and the show's logo was not animated. Its colours were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little child would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it. I assumed it was done for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Grieving, a sort of sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone facing a corner of his dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanour he usually has. There was no one else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother, Darwin the goldfish, and the windows in the room clearly showed that it was night time. I was starting to get confused. Why would he be at school at night? And why was he standing in the corner, all sad and alone? After what seemed for about a minute of Gumball standing somberly in the corner, the scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's home. Once again the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard, Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen. He looks even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard isn't usually wearing his normal attire. He isn't anymore. He's dressed in a fancy black suit, a little uncharacteristic of him, as he's usually a slob. He sighs and slumps down onto the sofa. He starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something very important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. Where was the silly fun cartoon that I usually look forward to watching with my younger brother? This was something totally different. I was beginning to think that this might have been something the creators did as a test or something. A test of the animation, or sound perhaps. Though it could have been, aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows. The episode had been much quieter than it usually was, only subtle sounds and very little music, and the animation was not anything to write home about either. It was done a little bit like an amateur flash on newsgrounds. The characters' designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the show looked different. As confused and somewhat frightened as I was, for some reason, I kept watching it. Poor Richards was still sobbing on the sofa, as the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise, and Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't here wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was wearing a black dress and a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the sofa to comfort her husband, although she was looking saddened herself. By this point, Richard's crying had begun to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal crying on the show. This was realistic and almost depressing. I almost felt like myself sobbing. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended. As it shifted back to the school, we weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there, in their usual clothes, looking more happy than they were before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Ananias and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day. They hadn't been seen for all of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him. She began spouting various insults and calls him that I don't think would have made it onto the more mature program like regular show. I was laughing at this because it seemed sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else after she had finally quieted down. Her eyes began to tear up as he informed her that they eventually were found, but not alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found. Their parents sitting in utter shock. I could hardly believe this was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kids show be taking such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the TV off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now, nearly frozen by fear and disturbed insanely at the terrible things that he was saying. Another flashback that scene was earlier the day, and the animation in the scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they first turned up missing, believing that the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school. They said it was rather uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid. He would have never dreamed of doing something like that. And Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight A student, despite being only 4, which also troubled the police, seeing as a defenseless 4-year-old little girl was missing, as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside of the school. It took little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais. In a small clearing outside of the school, Anais' head was found in a small box. You likely would have expected something like that to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box inside and out, while Anais' head was done in the perfectly normal style of the show, but was drenched in blood and some other fluids. Not all of them hers apparently. There was a note in the box, seemingly written in her own blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains and Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remembered most about the scene was how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais' slaughtering dismembered remains was done in a very realistic and disturbing way. It seemed like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not something from a kids show. The way this scene was animated was very different from most of the designs on the show. You may know that the characters from the series are done in vastly different animation styles, from flash animation to CGI. I think there's even a character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene was unlike anything I'd ever seen on the show before. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. He looked like a zombie. His face was very pale, and his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Anais fared no better, or what was left of her anyway. She was naked, and her stomach had been slit open. Her intestines were strewn around the trees and bushes in the woods, done once again in that very morbid and realistic style. I was feeling ill by this time. This incredibly disturbing flashback had finally come to an end, so I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. I was feeling better after upchucking, so I had realised that I had been gone for a long time, and I had ran to the bathroom during a commercial. It was then that I noticed that the show had been running twice as long as it normally does. It usually ran for 11 minutes, but this episode was running for about 30. But then I was wondering if there was any information on The Grieving, on IMDb or something. So while the commercials were still playing, I looked up some information about this episode on Google. Nothing came up. No information remotely similar to the plot or the name of this episode existed anywhere. Now, incredibly scared, and wondering if anybody else was watching, I quickly dialed my brother Larry and asked him to turn on to Cartoon Network and see if he was seeing the same shit as that I was. He was pretty mad that I woke him at this hour, but he's a nice guy, and he told me he would have a look. I thanked him and stayed on the line as the show came back from the commercial break. The scene had thankfully panned away from the horrific sight of the children mutilated and was back to Principal Brown's office. I asked Larry if he saw some cartoon animals talking or crying, since that's what they were doing on my TV. To my surprise, he saw nothing like that. Instead, it was a rerun of an old Looney Tunes short. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran over the TV to turn it off, and as hard as I pressed the buttons, it would not shut off. I tried every single button, and none of them did a thing. I tried unplugging the whole thing as well, but nothing worked. The TV stayed on, no matter what. Larry had hung up, assuming I was playing a sick joke or something. I guess, and I was alone once again. My door was locked from the outside somehow, and the door to my bathroom was locked too. It seemed that I had no choice but to call the police, since my other family members were gone that night. It was the reason I could stay up so late to watch Adult Swim in the first place. When I hurriedly dialed the number, I accidentally dropped my cell phone into the cup of Pepsi. I was very scared, and now I had no choice but to finish the episode. I turned on all the lights in my room, got under my covers, hiding like my brother does when I'm making watch scary movies with me. I had apparently missed a little bit, but Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown, so not that much. Nicole was asking him if Gumball was fine, apparently since she hadn't remembered him from what Principal Brown had told her what happened to Darwin and Ananias. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment. He explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today, and he had spent the day at home by himself with the stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed, while Richard quietly told him, in a very out-of-character voice, that they had thought Gumball had got on the bus this morning, but it didn't seem that way. The police were called once again to search the building and the small forest outside of Elmore Junior High. They found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose, with a blood-covered knife behind him and blood covering his clothing. The episode ended with a shot of Gumball's dead body, hanging there in the corner, fading to the black. The credits rolled silently, not like the usual way Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that squishes half of the screen. These credits rolled unusually slow, and they weren't that fun to watch either. A little creepy, just plain white text scrolling on a black background. I only recognised Ben Bloquet's name, as he was the creator of the show. The rest were people I'd never even heard of. The copyright notice at the end said, Cartoon Network Studios, 2001, which was incredibly odd, seeing as the show was brand new for 2011. After everything was over, the screen went to static for a split second, during which some incredibly creepy and shocking video clips were shown between static intervals. I can still remember them all very clearly. The first was a photo of a person in a plague doctor outfit. Those always seemed to scare me for some reason, and the way the person in the suit was filmed was just as bad. A red light, something that freaks me out incredibly, was shown on the clip. The next was what seemed like a video played very quickly, over and over, of a cat's face being squished by a woman wearing high heels, which was strange because a so-called friend of mine sent me a photo yesterday of a cat being stepped on and killed, similar to the cat in the video. The last one was the one that scared me the most, and it made me want to both cry and vomit my guts up. It was my little brother, or at least it seemed like a small child who looked very similar to him, being shot in the face by a person who looked like my father. You could clearly see the kid's brains and blood splatter on the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably after that traumatizing clip, so much that I passed out. When I woke up, my door was unlocked and my television was switched off. I went to call the police on the home phone in my kitchen and to report that I had seen some very disturbing things on TV and that my doors had been locked. When they arrived, they could find nothing like what I remembered earlier this morning. My internet history was cleared. They were angry at me, and just assumed that I had a bad nightmare, when I was sure I hadn't. Thankfully, one of the officers felt bad for me, and took me out to a small diner so I could recollect my thoughts. At the diner, I remembered that my family was out visiting my aunt, and they were surprised to be back by noon or so. It was already 11, so the officer and I drove back only to find a whole squad of police cars and even some government agents at my house. They explained that my little brother had gone missing, and that my mother and father were very major suspects. I was freaking out. and trying to tell them about the disturbing clip of the boy who looked like my brother being shot in the head, but they wouldn't listen. I stayed with my older brother, Larry, who wouldn't believe me either, still insisting that all he saw was an old Looney Tunes cartoon, and nothing at all creepy or weird. The cops eventually told me that they would contact Turner Broadcasting and tell them about the incident. A representative of Turner Broadcasting came to my cousin's house to talk to me in private about what I had seen and experienced that night. He was very kind, but it all seemed like some sort of front, after I could tell him all I'd remembered. He agreed to play back the day's programming from when the incident with the disturbing Gumball episode had occurred. To my shock, all that was airing at that time was an old Looney Tunes short, nothing more, nothing less. I hysterically sobbed and moaned that what I'd experienced seemed was completely real, but nobody listened. Eventually, I had discovered that Ben Beauclerc had a Twitter account, so I sent a message about that episode, and this was the only reply I got. One thing, how in the heck did you find that? I never, ever thought I would think about that old shame again. Don't tell anyone this, Sarah. Yes, that's my name. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back farther than you know. I used to have a really boring job as a teenager, and I sketched little drawings of the Wattersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anybody but me and a few friends. It was a very, very awful thing to do. But we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job who hated had lost a child to a crazed serial killer who was apparently still out there somewhere. Anyways, we made it so we could make fun of how he came into work usually, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in the episode. I know, and I am deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Literally, I went out to the countryside with my mates and dug a hole and buried it. What I don't get though, is how you describe the blood and guts and stuff. We didn't have any scenes with Darwin and Elias's body being found. All that happens in the episode is that the parents are informed of the kids being found dead, and them crying like crazy. We didn't even draw anything in the episode like that. At all. We're not that sick. No, this is my theory. The lunatic who killed the man's child found the tape we buried, watched it, and heavily edited it. Then he hijacked the local TV station near blank. I blocked out the name of my city. I'm paranoid enough, and it's a small town. Somehow, and got the episode to air on your local Cartoon Network station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I've got no idea. Why it seems you're the only one who saw it, I have no idea either. Sorry, but I just don't know. Now for the explanation you have been waiting for. The clips at the end, I don't know. I don't. I'm deeply sorry from the bottom of my heart, but I don't know why these clips were aired. I just don't. I'm sorry, I really am. But me and my mates are the ones who made those scenes with Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. I am so sorry, Sarah. I am so deeply sorry. Best wishes, Ben Beauclerc, and everybody involved with the Grieving. And that, my dorks, was The Grieving, a Amazing World of Gumball Lost episode creepypasta. My final thoughts and opinions on the story? Well, it's better than Dead Bard at least. But, once again, it's not good. Let's be real. This episode, like Dead Bart, feeds on blood and guts and crazy stuff happening. However, unlike Dead Bart, this, just the insane amount of coincidences and perfectly timed events, like him dropping Pepsi in a cup, or his doors mysteriously locking. Oh, it's a her, sorry, it's Sarah. I always thought it was a boy, because I never really read this story, I only heard the creepypasta readings. It's just all crazy in this. However, I could potentially believe this being real, like somebody, a sicko, hijacking it, editing it, and airing it. But why only one person? That's an interesting thing. But at least with this thing, compared to Dead Bart, they actually tried at something with this, unlike Dead Bart, which just blatantly feeded on blood and guts. This actually went somewhere and did kind of a story, but it's still not the best. If I had to give a final rating for the story, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. It just feeds a little too much on blood and guts for my liking, but it's better than Dead Bart because it actually did something with the story, or it tried to. It's one of the more passable Lost Episode creepypastas out there. But anyways, that's all from me. This is the Dark Author, signing off.